All right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you brought your A game tonight as we settle into some all-important Talmud. In the message I sent out, I titled it, "When you die and get to heaven, these are the questions they're going to ask you." But we'll get to that later in the Gemara. We'll get to that later. First, we're going to live a little bit, then we'll talk about dying. We're in the middle of a section of the Talmud, and we're talking over here about the three potential converts who each came first to Shammai and posed a question which was filled with chutzpah. How do you translate chutzpah into English? Disrespect. Truth is, chutzpah is one of those words which doesn't really have a translation. Right. You know, the lady who gets onto a bus and there's no seats there, no seats available. She goes over to the first person she sees and says, "If you had what I had, you would get up and give me my seat." So the guy, I don't know, is like taken aback by that and immediately jumps out of his place. I don't know what this lady has. It gets, stands 10 feet away from her and gives her a seat. Finally, she turns to the guy next to him who has a drink or something. Next to where she's sitting, and she said, "If you had what I had, you'd give me that drink." Very intimidating. So, has the drink. He basically gets whatever she wants. At the end of the trip, someone turns to her and says, "Lady, what do you have?" She says, "I got chutzpah." So that's all it takes to get whatever you need in life. Okay, so these three situations in which a Gentile approached Shammai and asked her an absurd condition to conversion, and Shammai rejected that person naturally, and Hillel embraced him. So we got through one of the three last week. This week we'll go through the next two stories. The second one is the more famous of the three. The second one is the most famous, and if you know any of these three episodes, you know this one. And if you don't know, that's fine. We'll learn it out. Shuv Maisa. There was also a story, about a Gentile, Shabal Lifnei Shammai, who came in front of Shammai. Again, the two great Torah scholars of the time were Shammai and Hillel. So first came to Shammai, Omar Lei, and he said to him, Gaireni, I'd like you to convert me, Al Minas, on condition, Shetilamdeni Kol HaTorah Kula, that you teach me the entire Torah, Kisha Ani Omed Al Regel Achas, while I stand on one leg. Can you teach me the entire Torah while I stand on one leg? So he asks this to Shammai. So Shammai says, Dachafo be'amas habin. Shammai pushed him away. Be'amas habinyan. What is the amas habinyan? Amas habinyan is a measuring stick for a building. It's a measuring stick for a building. Translated as the ruler that he was holding in his hand, but really it means a measuring stick which is used to push away, to measure a building. And he used that stick to push him away. Understandably, someone today were to show up in a Jewish basin and say, I'd like to convert on condition that I could learn all of Torah on one leg, they would say, get lost. But then he came in front of Hillel. And he said the same thing. He came in front of Hillel. And then again, here's the novelty of the Gemara. Gaire, Hillel converted him. And then he said to him, notice he accepted him, he converted him almost before even addressing the question. And then he said, the Allah Sami, you want to know the entire Torah on one leg? Here's the entire Torah on one leg. The Allah Sami, that which to you is disliked, that which you don't like done to yourself, l'chavrach lo savim, don't do to someone else. That which you don't like done to yourself, don't do to someone else. Zuhi kol haTorah kula. That is the entire Torah. The idach pirushahu, and the rest is commentary on that one statement. The rest of Torah is commentary on that. And then he said, Zil Gemara, but now go and study that commentary. All right, so that's the story. Again, it's a rather famous story in the Gemara. Can you tell me the entire Torah will stand on one leg? And Hillel says, Shammai says, get lost. Hillel says, that which you don't like done to yourself, don't do to anyone else. Any questions on this? Does this Gemara sit well with you? Are there any questions that come up? If you do ask a question, I'll repeat it because we're following vertically. Yes?
Is this the one-legged beggar?
The one-legged beggar. Nope. I mean, this is the one-legged
So he had 2 legs.
He had 2 legs. He said, teach me the Torah while I stand on one leg. There you go. Teach it to me now, the entire Torah. So.
Did we learn this? Did we have a class now?
It could be we studied, not in the last,
So last week we had.
not in the last 5-6 months. Last week we spoke about the first convert who said, the first convert was the one who said, teach me the written Torah and not the oral Torah. That's what we spoke about last week. This is something which comes up. It's possible that we said this story comes up. You know, it's one of the more famous stories of the difference between Hillel and Shammai is often emphasized here. But there's some real questions on this. Yes, go ahead.
The conversion process, like automatically he's converted and he's a full Jew before he's even taught the rules. So it's like the way it's saying, like, you know.
Yes. So this is where we spoke about this last week a little bit, that what Hillel was doing, how he converted them, was not something that a Beis Din could do nowadays. Now, as Hillel had you could say, the wisdom, or perhaps more importantly, almost like the divine knowledge. He was able to look at this person and sense that this person had it in him to be a proper Jew. Even though the question was improper, even though the approach was improper, Hillel was able to see within this person almost like a Jewish soul. And he said, all right, you're confused in the way you're asking the question, but I have absolute faith that you're going to turn out okay. And therefore I'm converting you now, and we're going to figure out the problems afterwards. That doesn't work nowadays. That wouldn't work nowadays in a base. But that's how he did it. You have to be a Hillel to be able to do that. But this is not a system which would work nowadays. So this is not like, don't try this at home. It's just saying, we learned something very powerful. But this story itself, as beautiful as it is, there seems to be some missing pieces. Is that really all of Torah?
Missing God.
Right. Oh, missing God. That which you be nice to your friend, that's the essence of Judaism? What about the entire Torah is based on 2 pillars? 2 pillars, which is between man and their fellow, between man and God. So Hillel didn't know that. You know, did Hillel not understand, recognize the fact that Torah is, that an essential part of Judaism is serving God? I mean, if you were to follow this approach, that Judaism is about just being nice to other people, then that could be entirely atheistic too. So how do we address that? And secondly, another question which the commentaries speak about as we dive a little further into this, is that why does he use a negative terminology? He says that which you don't like done to yourself, don't do to someone else. Why not positive? That which you like, that which you want for yourself, you should want for someone else. Wouldn't that be a more optimistic way? Torah is not just about not hurting others. Torah is about being kind to others. And yet over here, he makes it about don't do to someone that which you don't want done to yourself. So the story, again, as nice as it sounds off the top, you know, when you just hear it the first time, there's really some serious questions about it. Yeah. Any answers, any thoughts on that?
I guess I would have one, because not what you want might not be what he wants. So you don't want to wish something that it's not relevant also.
Okay, something you want, that may not be what that person wants.
Also, like how you.
But by the way, can't you say that both things? That what you don't want may not parallel what they don't want.
I guess that's true. But then perhaps like the idea, like, where's God in this scenario?
Where is God? Yeah, that
so
question.
Like the way you treat others is kind of like a reflection of how you treat God.
The way you treat others is a reflection on how you treat God. Okay, why? I mean, that's a nice thing. Again, that sounds nice, but why would that be? Why would that be the case? Why can't you say, well, I treat others just because of who they are? Again, I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm saying, what is the logic to build that upon? Yes.
Because I think it enabled someone to think deeper. Like, what is it? What are things that people do to you that you don't like, you're able to draw on that and then be able to use it in practical real
Right.
life and not.
So this idea that things which people do to you negatively, bringing it to yourself makes you to really, brings it home and allows you to treat people by focusing on your own experiences.
On your own experiences and what ticks you off and what.
Right. Okay, good. Let's share some of the commentary on it. So I'm reading now from the Maharsha, as we mentioned last week, when it comes to the Talmud that talks about stories or ideas which are not that legal, that's where you turn to often the Maharsha, Rabbi Shmuel Edel's commentary. So I'm going to read a commentary of the Maharsha in the article. It's number 17 on page 31A2. Maharsha suggests, let's go a step back. Another question is, is there a deeper idea behind the question that was posed? Teach me the entire Torah on one leg. I mean, any person understands that Torah is bigger than a 5-second statement.
Isn't what you're saying with the 2 pillars, it's just saying 1 pillar?
So this is what the Maharsha understands, that he sees there was something deeper here. Maharsha suggests that the Gentiles' request was not purely fictitious. Rather, he wished to know whether the Torah could in fact be made to stand on one foot. That is, whether one can identify any single foundational principle upon which the entire Torah was based. That's what the Maharsha says. Maharsha says that what he's asking, his real question was, can you give me the essential idea upon which Judaism is based? And by the way, I've been posed that question too. Can you tell me what is the essence of Judaism? That's basically what he's saying. Tell me the one leg upon which Judaism stands. Shammai rejected it. Now, once you understand that question, okay, that's not such a bad question. That's not, you could ask that about certain things. What is the foundation? What is many enormous companies have a mission statement which is 3 lines long. So that would be the goal. What is the mission statement of Judaism? Okay, that's a fair question. But Shammai rejected it. Shammai replied to him in the negative, pushing him aside with a ruler used to measure foundations of buildings. And that's why I focused before. It says Shammai pushes him away. It doesn't just say pushes him away, but amas habinyan, with a ruler to build something. What's interesting is the previous story, which we learned last week, about the convert who said, teach me the written Torah, but not the oral Torah. So it says Shammai rejected him, but the wording is different there. It says dachapo benazifo. He threw him out in anger. Here it doesn't say he threw him out in anger. Somehow this time he pushes him away with some sort of building ruler. Why? What's the reason? So Maharsha explains that through this gesture, Shammai implied that just as a building cannot stand on a single pedestal, but must rather have a broad and well laid out foundation, so too the Torah cannot be reduced to any single principle. You want to know a single principle? There's no single principle. Judaism is not about one principle. Rather, its precepts are broad in scope and cannot be neatly summed up in any one statement. Sometimes we like that. We like having, a single statement which carries all the meaning of life, which I could post onto Instagram or post somewhere and say, I have it all figured out because I got this line. Judaism is not that way. Judaism is not a one-trick pony. Yeah.
So the person that was asking the rabbis to ask them to explain Judaism, was that person Jewish to begin with? Or
No,
they were
this is not. He's this person who's asked someone who's interested in converting. And he says, I'd like to convert, but I want to know, tell me, what is Judaism based on? Give me that one line. And Shammai says, there's no one line.
Because perhaps maybe the rules or commandments that even the non-Jews were obligated to follow could somewhat, I think, be more in line to, not to others, because you don't want that. Because certain rules, like contract, for example, you can't draw the parallel with do unto others.
Right.
You don't want, but other ones like don't kill or adultery, I guess.
Right, so you could say perhaps the answer that Hillel gave aligns itself with the 7 Noahide commandments, but Hillel wasn't talking about the 7 Noahide commandments. He was talking about all of Torah. He was talking about the entirety of Torah. And at this point, he had already converted it, right? It's the same person. He already converted it. So the next question, so that explains what the question was, and it explains why Shammai rejects it, because the Torah is not based on one single principle. But now the question is, what's Hillel's answer? Again, it's a feel-good answer, but is it a true answer? To say that the essence of Torah is don't hurt someone else. So again, we'll share some of the answers that the commentaries give. So the basic question, of Hillel's statement is obvious. Hillel seems to provide an accurate summary of the Torah's laws which discuss between man and their fellow. How does it summarize the mitzvahs between man and God? Rashi sort of addresses this question. And that is that the wording, Rashi says, Re'acha v're'a avicha al taz. Rashi says that God, we find the verse in Mishlei, Proverbs, which describes God as your fellow. So therefore you can understand the words of Hillel saying that which your fellow doesn't like is referring to God. And then it sort of makes sense. That which your fellow does not like, your fellow could be referring to God. And then if you say, that which you do not like, that your fellow does not like, you should not do, is referring to God. Do not do that which God doesn't want you to do. So that's Rashi's first explanation, is that Hillel was saying, don't do that which God doesn't want. Just like you don't want your wishes to be rejected, don't reject God's wishes. But then the second answer of Rashi is no, he means literally your friend. He says, no, he's talking about theft and robbery and adultery. So briefly, without going into such great depth, I'll share something which Chassidus explains, the Chassidic answer to this question. And that is that the truth is, when we think of Judaism, you may think that there's two basic pillars: how we treat others and how we treat God. And you can kind of fit each mitzvah into one or the other, right? Do not kill is how we treat others. Keeping Shabbos, that's between us and God. Do not steal is others. Keeping kosher, us and God. Do not take revenge is us and others. Prayer, between us and God. So you can kind of very clearly divide one into the other. But Tanya says the truth is that the Torah obligation to love your fellow is at a very lofty level. It says, love your fellow as yourself. And the Tanya says that the only way you can love your fellow as you love yourself is if you see them as a divine being. The only way you can reach that level of love for another person is if you see the spark of God in them. Without seeing the spark of God in them, you could be nice to them, you could be kind to others, but to actually love every other person, not just love someone you enjoy or someone you naturally like, but to love everyone as you love yourself, there's only one possible way, and that is if you see the godly soul within them, and you treat them as such. And therefore, I'll just finish this thought. And therefore, says the Tanya, love for another person and love of God are actually intrinsically connected. You cannot have one without the other. It's a pretty radical thing to say. Someone could say, I love God, but I don't get along with people that well. Chassidus says, if you say that, that means you don't really love God. And someone who says, I don't really connect with God, but I love other people, Chassidus will say, you don't really love other people. You cannot have one without the other. So really, based on this idea, and again, I know there's some questions that we'll take in a moment, but I just want to, that basically says there really are no two pillars. There is one pillar. There is the recognition, the love that we have for God, and therefore that translates itself into the love we have for the people in whom we see the spark of God. And so therefore, if you see spirituality, Torah, in that light, then yes, it is one pillar, which Hillel was responding. So Shammai was saying there are many pillars. You can't narrow down to one pillar. Hillel says no. At its core, there's one. There is really echad. There is that one essential idea Judaism is, which is to love another like yourself, which requires you to see God in another person. And so then yes, the relationship we have with God, the relationship we have with others, does fit into one single leg, so to say. Yes.
Do we as Jews have to love only other Jews or also going?
The mitzvah, the obligation of a haftal re'acha kamocha, is your fellow, is referring to a fellow Jew. The obligation, though, to see the divinity And that leads to all sorts of obligations, added level of charity, whatever. The obligation to personally treat all kindly. But in context of what we're saying here, to see the spark of God within everyone, that's to everyone. Pirkei Avos says, you see the spark of God in everyone. So there is an added obligation of tzedakah and certain obligations of goodness to one's fellow Jew. But the essential idea we're saying over here of seeing God in everyone applies to everyone. Yes. I think. Okay. So again, there's a lot more to talk about over here, but basically it's a very powerful point that we reach is that yes, the way we see others and the way we see God really does come down to one essential component. Yes.
My thing is that like when it comes down to it, it's like sure, I agree 100% on all the things that are nice to each other, but when it comes to para adama and certain things that we do just for God and God only, it's kind of just for God. It's not like anything that has anything to do with each
So there
other.
still remains the mitzvahs which are between us and God. We still have the distinction between the two types of mitzvahs. But what this Hasidic explanation does is it says there aren't two completely separate components within Judaism. You wouldn't say the Torah has two separate, totally separate. They are inherently connected. Yes, even within that connection, there are some things which we're going to do for someone else, for our fellow human being, and there's some things we're going to do for God. So there is that, still is a separation. But the idea that love your fellow as yourself becomes the essential principle of Torah is not separate from our relationship with God. We can't separate our relationship with others and our relationship with God. They are inherently connected. All right, there's still one more question we didn't answer about this, which is why does Hillel say, don't do to others that which you don't want done to yourself? Why not do to others that which you've done to you want done to yourself? So the what's that? Right, do to others. You want someone to be nice to you, be nice to them. So the Marshal is an interesting answer, actually a halachic answer. And he says like this. When it comes to prohibitions, like do not kill, do not steal, do not take revenge, do not harbor a grudge, do not speak negative. So actually your obligation to someone else is the same as what you would expect of yourself. However it is that whatever it is that you don't want done to you, to be treated, to be mistreated, to be hated, to be slandered, to be robbed, to be stolen from, you are at the same exact level forbidden to do that to someone else. It really is a perfect parallel. As opposed to positive, it's not a perfect parallel. I have a greater degree of obligation to myself when it comes to positive than I do to someone else. And a simple expression of this idea is another Gemara, which says that if two people, and we actually studied this in one of our classes, if two people are walking in a desert and I have a bottle of water, and this bottle of water only has enough water for one person to survive, then what am I supposed to do with that bottle of water? I'm walking the desert with someone else, one bottle of water, only enough for one person to survive. What am I supposed to do? I'm supposed to drink that bottle of water myself. I don't have to share. I'm supposed to share that with the other person. Why? Because we have a principle in Torah called Chayecha Kodem. Your life comes first. You have to save someone else's life when you can, but not at the expense of your life. Your life comes before someone else's life. Which from here you see that you can't really say whatever you do for yourself, you have to do for someone else. It's not halachically correct. Because there could be a situation in which you should actually give yourself the drink and not give it to another person. But so therefore, because it's not entirely accurate to say that which you want done to yourself, you should do to someone else, because there could be a situation where you should do something for yourself, take that water for yourself, and you're not doing it for someone else. But it is accurate to say that whatever you don't want done to yourself, you shouldn't do to someone else. There's never a situation in which you're allowed to do something negative to someone which you wouldn't want done to yourself. So in the negative, it is equal. In the positive, it's not always equal. And that's the Marshal's explanation of why he said it that way. Yeah.
Where do we find that principle?
Chayecha Kodem?
Yeah.
It's based on a pasuk in the Torah that it said, the pasuk says, I don't know which parsha it is, but the words in the pasuk are "V'chei achecha achicha imach." Your brother should live with you. So that's the source of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva is the one who teaches us this. He says your brother should live. You should help your brother live as long as imach with you, as long as you're able to live as well. So as long as your life is established, then you should do whatever it is to make sure your brother lives. But your life does come first. So that's why he didn't want to say whatever you want done to yourself, do to someone else, because it's not halachically accurate. Yes.
How do you know how much water specifically is going to be enough for you to survive over sharing it?
It's a good question. That's a good question for that Gemara. But there are situations, sometimes it may be clear. I think today,
And is this
someone with medical knowledge could probably answer that question now.
It makes no difference, Jew or not?
Doesn't make a difference. You have an obligation. You saved your life instead of your life comes first. Obviously, ideally, if you can squeeze out enough water for both of you to survive, that's what you should do. But that's the example. By the way, that example of it's not just about water in a desert. There are many expressions of that example in which a person has to choose between saving their life. And unfortunately, this is not just theoretical. Actual cases have happened. Good. It's a topic for that Gemara, but the way Maharsha explains this Gemara, that's why Hillel answered the question the way he did. Because when it comes to negative, we are exactly equal. When it comes to positive, not necessarily. Fine. That's enough on this Gemara. And right. Let's go on to the third conference. So we have two stories, one last week, one this week. I still want to get to the 6 questions they ask you upon reaching the world to come. So we still have to get to the next section of the Gemara. Let's get, what time is it?
It is
8:38. All right, we've got time. Now I'm going to move through this next story a little bit more quickly than we did the previous one. We'll basically go through the basic explanation of the Talmud, and then we'll move on to the next one. Shuv Maisa. Another story happened about another convert, the Nachri Echad, a Gentile, who happened to be walking behind the yeshiva study hall. The Shama called Sofer, and he heard the sound of the scribe or the teacher. Rashi says over here, doesn't mean a scribe, but rather Melamed Tinok, someone who teaches children. He was reading from the pasuk in the Torah portion in Shemos. It's the Torah portion of Truma, where it talks about the following. The pasuk says, these are the clothing that you should make, and they are Choshen, the ephod, and he listed all of the beautiful garments. And so the pasuk says you should make these beautiful garments. Omar, this person who's walking behind the Medrash hears about these wonderful, beautiful garments. So he said, Halalu Lami. Who are these for? Who gets to wear these beautiful garments? Amrullah. So I don't know, maybe he asked the children who were studying teacher. Amrullah, they said to him, L'kohen Gadol, this belongs to the high priest. Omar, Oisei Nachri Ba'atzmai. So that Gentile thought to himself, those clothing sound really nice. But I got to convert to get to those clothing. He says, Eilech ve'egar, I will go and convert. Bishvil she is simuni Kohen Gadol, so they'll make me the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, and I'll get to wear those clothing. So Balaf ne Shammai, he came in front of Shammai and posed his suggestion. Amar lo, and he said to him, Gaireini, please convert me. Almanas shetisimeni Kohen Gadol, on condition that you make me the Kohen Gadol. I'd like to convert, but there's only one real motivation here. I want to become the Kohen Gadol. So convert me and I'll become the Kohen Gadol. So as you can imagine, he sent him flying. He said, get out of here. That same person, Balaf ne Hillel, came in front of Hillel. What happens? The first thing Hillel does is Gaire. He says, no problem, you're converted. And then he says, now let's talk. Omar Loi, he says, you want to become a Kohen Gadol? All right, well then you got to learn the rules a little bit. If we're going to establish a king, you got to learn the rules of kingdom. You want to be you want to reach the highest standard. No problem. Let's study it. Let's go learn the rules. So he went to the Korah and he started studying Torah. He reached the verse which states the Hazar HaKarev Humus in Bamidbar. Later in the Torah, it talks about the temple and the holiness of the temple. It says Hazar, a foreigner who gets close, gets close, enters the Beis Hamikdash when he shouldn't, you must dies for it. The penalty is dead. Omar Lei. So he read this verse and he said, who's this verse talking about when it says that a foreigner who enters the temple will die? Omar Lei, to which they answered him, Afilu al David Melech Yisrael, even King David himself, if he enters the temple, he dies. That's not the Zarakar means anybody who's a non-Kohen may not enter the holy temple. So this person heard this and he thought, Nasa oisa ger kal v'chomer b'aftos. At this point, he's a convert. He made a kal v'chomer. I don't know why he translated kal v'chomer. He made the following calculation to himself. He says, the Jewish people referred to as God's children. And God loves them. He refers to them as my firstborn child Israel. Nevertheless, about these people, it says, and King David himself enters the temple and he dies. I who arrived here with my stick. How much more so I should not be entering the holy temple. And therefore, he accepted that he would not become a Kohen Gadol. So Hillel allowed him to almost figure it out himself. This is something very, very practical bit of advice over here. That is that, and it's true with children. I see, you deal with little children, you see it all the time, but I think it's true with adults too. And that is that when you clash with someone, you elicit competition, and then you clash with someone and you say, no, you're wrong. So what do you elicit from the other person? I'm right. I will fight for my opinion. Today we live in a very divided world, right? Everything is about all opinions. We're divided by politically, every issue that comes up, we're divided. So what happens is very often is that when you argue with someone, the result is not that person wants to hear you, but the person wants to double down and really prove that his approach is right. And therefore Shammai said so. Shammai said, get out of here. You make what you're saying. But Hillel says, okay, no problem. Come on in. And Hillel says, why don't you figure it out yourself? Instead of me telling you you're wrong, me telling you that your idea is absurd, I'm going to allow you to learn and figure it out yourself. When you allow a person to reach the conclusion themselves, maybe by subtly guiding them in the right place, here, study this, and maybe you'll realize there's something wrong about your approach. And that person, you disarm that person, so to say, from their competitive edge, from the midas hanitzachon, the idea of victory. It's not about a battle. It's about finding the truth. Why don't you search for the truth yourself? And I think that's perhaps a message we could take from Hillel's approach over here. He said, no problem. Why don't you study it? It was brilliant. It was kind, but it was also brilliant. He was kind by welcoming him in, but then it was brilliant by saying, I think if you study, you'll come to your own conclusion about the mistake of your approach. And that's the message he says. And this is the third story. So the interesting point over here is that Hillel, we have three circumstances in which Shammai rejects the potential convert. Hillel welcomes them in. And ultimately, which approach do we take as Jews in situations of conversion nowadays? Do we more mirror Shammai or Hillel? Shammai. It would seem we mirror Shammai more, but I don't know if that's really accurate. I mean, even though the Gemara itself said that when someone looks to convert, the initial response should be, why do you need it? But ultimately, the Gemara also says that once you see, or if that person persists and says, no, this is really what I want, then you're supposed to take the Hillel approach. The idea of pushing away, of saying you don't need this, is only an initial response. Once that person passes that barrier, then you welcome, then we take the Hillel approach. You welcome them in and you do whatever you can to help them. If you recall, we actually studied this Gemara, I remember several months ago. We derived this from the story of Ruth. Ruth, who was perhaps the most famous convert ever, and her mother-in-law, it says her mother-in-law tried to dissuade her 3 times actually, The third time, once Ruth said, no, I am going with you. Amech, your nation is my nation. Then it says she actually assisted her in the process. So even though, yes, we take both Shammai and Hillel in this situation, where the initial response is a sense of why, and you don't need this. But once there's a persistence, once the person says, no, this is really what I want, then we are supposed to take the Hillel approach of embracing. Anyway, back to the Gemara over here. It says, this person then came back to Hillel. After he figured this out on his own, he came back to Hillel. Hillel, Amarle, Anvasan Hillel. He says, your humility, although I see over here translated as your patience. He says, the Hillel, the humble one. Yonuchu lacha brachas al roshcha. Let blessings dwell upon your head. Shehikraftani tachas kampei Shechina, that you brought me close under the wings of the Shechina, divine presence. L'yamin, it so happened that sometime past, Nizdavgu shloshtan, these three people of the three previous stories, these three converts met one another, Lamaka Mefa, and they found themselves together in one place. Amru, when they said the following: Kapdanusa shel Shammai, the sternness of Shammai, biksha litardeinu min ha'olam, wished to push us out, to push us away. Literally means push us away from the world. Shammai's sternness wanted to push us away. And Vasnusa shel Hillel, but the humility and patient manner of Hillel, Kirvanu tachas kampei Shechina, brought us close under the wings of the Shechina. So these three people all learned to value and appreciate the humility and the kindness and the patience of Hillel. So with this, the Gemara concludes a section which speaks about the righteousness of Hillel and his patience. Again, started with the story which we spoke about last week, about the person who tried to anger Hillel and he had no success. And it continues into these three people who Hillel brought them in, and in a loving, patient way was able to, again, and I think key word over here is in a loving way, in a non-confrontational way. He didn't argue. Shammai sent them away. You could say, Hillel would say, all right, I'll keep you, but I'm going to tell you why you're wrong. That's not what happened. It was non-confrontational, and that's how he was able to turn them around so that they joined him on his team, so to say. So there's a lot, I think there's a lot to be learned from these stories. Okay, with that, let's jump to a few lines to the following Gemara. The bottom of Shabbos 31a. Amar Rava. If you're reading from the actual Gemara, it is 4 lines from the bottom of the page. Amar Rava, the great sage Rava said as follows. The pasuk over here that he's focusing on is, it's a pasuk in Yeshaya, chapter 33. And the verse in Yeshaya says the following, and this is what this Rav is coming to comment. The verse states, "V'haya emunas itecha chosen Yeshuas chachma v'das." The stability of your time and the strength of salvation is wisdom and knowledge. The fear of God is in his storehouse. That's the pasuk. Very cryptic. Rava says, here's what this verse is coming to tell us. B'sha'a shemachnisim adam l'din. When a person is brought before heavenly judgment. So when a person dies and goes up to heaven, a lot of jokes start that way. So somebody dies and goes to heaven. This is not a joke. When a person dies and goes up to heaven, the following questions are posed to him or her. Oimrim loy, they ask them the following. What's the first question that is posed? Maybe you know this, Gemara. But if you don't know the Gemara, what do you think the first question is? If you're guessing and you guess right, get an extra piece of chocolate. What's that?
Did you have a set time to study Torah?
Did you have a set time to study Torah? Okay. Any other guesses?
Did you do business ethically?
Did he do business ethically?
He stole it.
He stole it. It's right.
Yep.
There you go. He said, how's that? He stole it. Of all questions to say he stole, did he do business ethically? So Did you do the first? All right, so the first question, the person comes to Din Amar, they say to him, Nasasa v'nasata be'emuna. That's why, again, focusing on the first words of the verse. Again, this is Yeshaya. This is the prophet Isaiah, chapter 33, verse number 6. So just to give some context of the verse from Isaiah. Chapter is the footnote over here, 28 in the article. The context of this verse is Isaiah's prophecy that Israel will be saved from the threat of Sanherib, which they were saved, king of Ashur, Assyria, one of the greatest kingdoms ever. Anyways, but he says they will be saved. In this verse, Yeshaya states that the Jewish people, if the Jewish people wish their new tranquility to be long-lasting, they should acquire wisdom, knowledge, and fear of God. These traits will be as a storehouse for them, preserving peace in the land. So now, Rava is focusing on each word in the verse. The first thing he says is emuna. Emuna, which we usually translate as faith. So you think it means having faith. Rava says no. The first question is, did you do business in good faith? Faith over here means business in good faith. The first question a person asks is nasasa v'nasata be'emuna. Did you do business in good faith? Conduct your business transactions faithfully. That's question number one. Question number two is what Avi said. Kavata itim l'Torah. Do you designate time to study Torah? By the way, let's listen to the words. It doesn't say, did you study Torah? The second question is, did you designate time to study Torah? Very important that we should have designated times. I mean, we could have the thought that whenever I have a free moment, I study Torah. That's nice, but there has to be set times designated for Torah study. Question number three, asakta b'piri of Arabia. Did you endeavor? Did you engage in having children? But the wording over here is not everyone is blessed to have children, but is it something that you pursue? That's question number three. Right. You attempt to have a family, to get married. It is something that you pursue that. Asakta means, what's that? That's not the proper way. Not the proper way.
But if you get married, you still gotta have children.
Question number four. Tzipisa liyeshua. This is not a simple one. Most people don't think of this. Tzipisa liyeshua means, did you anticipate salvation? Did you anticipate salvation? Did you look forward to redemption, to Mashiach, to salvation? An essential part of Judaism is not just doing good things and not just studying Torah, but the words awaiting the redemption. Did you anticipate salvation?
Which question is that?
Question number four. Rashi over here says, what is Tzipisa liyeshua? L'divrei anavim, to the words of the prophets. The words of the prophets are the words that the prophets speak of the redemption. The prophets are the ones, Yeshaya, for example, and others speak about the idea of redemption, and therefore that's what a person should anticipate, look forward to. The next one is pilpal. The next two are both within the context of Torah study. Pilpalta b'chachma, did you delve into wisdom? And when you learn Torah, hivanta davar mitov davar, did you try to derive one thing from another? This is what, in other words, if you study Torah properly. Studying Torah properly means not just a casual observing of of ideas here and there, but rather diving into Torah study, like we do every Thursday. What? Pilpalta b'chachma, which means did you delve into pilpalta? Pilpul is like here it says delve into, but really pilpul is that back and forth, the dialogue of wisdom. And hivanta davar mitach davar, did you infer one thing from another? Which means Torah is all about drawing a message from one to the other. You read a story, you learn the story of Yosef and his brothers. Did you then use that to derive lessons from it? Learning one thing, that's the essence of Torah study. So these are the 6 questions. These are the 6 questions. So you may think, okay, if I checked off all 6 boxes, I'm fine. If I can say, I was honest in business, I set times to study Torah, I was involved in building a family, anticipated redemption. What am I missing?
Engage in dialectics of wisdom.
Engage in dialectics of wisdom, and I study one from the other. I answer all the questions right. And he says, nevertheless, no. The end of the pasuk is Yiras Hashem hi hoitzar. The end of the pasuk says, but the fear of God is your storage house. He says, "V'afilu hachi." Even if a person can answer yes to all of those questions, Yiras Hashem hi, if a person then says, and I had fear of heaven, then a person will be okay. If a person cannot say that they had fear of heaven, then all of the above is lacking.
What about a person who lacked some of the answers, but feared heaven?
So in those situations, yeah, okay, so then you get 5 out of 6. What happens when you get in your exams? You get 5 out of 6. All right, see, so we believe that there's different levels of reward in the but this is so then the Gemara gives a parable to explain this. Mashal, you want to understand. So you may say, why, if so, then why isn't it mentioned first? So the Rabbi says a lot, mashal, yeah.
If someone learns or learns davar from davar, along with davar,
Okay.
and you have a fear of God, normally it doesn't happen. So it's a contradiction.
You're saying if you have fear of God, you cannot have limud of davar mitav davar? No, I think that's a misunderstanding then of the words learning a thing from another thing. Davar mitav davar is not a contradiction to fear of God.
Wish, but we don't see it.
All right, so let's just finish with the mashal. The mashal, he says, Rambam then says, if you want to have a parable for the idea I'm sharing, it could be as follows. Mashal adam shamar shlucha, a man who tells his emissary, ha'alei li kur chitin la'aliyah. Bring for me a core of a certain amount of wheat to the attic. Halach v'helelo. He went and he brought the wheat to the attic. Amar lo, at which point the housekeeper said to the agent, he said, you brought the wheat? He said, yes. He says, Eravta li bahen kav chomtun. Did you add into the wheat a portion of chomtun? Chomtun was a very salty substance. Did you make sure to sprinkle salt into the wheat? Amar lo lav. He said, no, you didn't tell me to put in salt. Amar lo, he said, mutov im lo alesa. Better had you not brought the wheat up. In other words, that the salt is the preservative to the wheat. So yes, you may have brought up all the wheat I asked you to, but you didn't put in the preservative, the wheat's going to go bad. And so what Rabbi is saying with this parable is something very profound. He's saying fear of heaven is not a 7th question. Fear of heaven is the preservative of all of the previous 6 questions. Fear of heaven is like the salt you need within each area of your life, within each area of observance. Business, honestly, you need fear of heaven. Anticipating redemption, fear of heaven. Setting aside to learn Torah, fear of heaven. Every one of these elements of your life, which you should think about, I should do, in order for it to be preserved properly, there needs to be a fear of heaven. Now, what does fear of heaven mean? All right, that we'll save that for another time, but there's different levels. Fear of heaven doesn't just mean fear of being zapped or fear of punishment. It could on a deeper level means a certain reverence, awareness of the presence of God. But the point of this Gemara is that even though, yes, there may be 5 or 6 very areas in life which one has to constantly think of, do I check off these boxes? These are the questions I'm going to be asked. But in each one, it could only be preserved, or for that matter, one can say all of Jewish observance. All of Jewish observance is only preserved if it comes along with a dose of Yirat Shamayim, fear of heaven. But if someone who has that, who doesn't have any of it, there's no sense of reverence of God, then none of these areas are properly observed. All right, that will conclude today's discussion. Join us next week as we continue. We'll see. Maybe we'll continue this Talmud. Maybe not. We'll determine that over the next week. Now, admire quickly, and then.